In front of everyone gathered inside the most gilded ballroom in the city, the cold billionaire laid a check on the table, $1 million for a scratched old watch on a working man's wrist. Every person in that room assumed he would bow his head and thank her. Instead, the man simply slid the check back across the polished mahogany. "I'm sorry, I can't sell it." The room went silent. Victoria Hale smiled, that razor-thin smile she reserved for people she found amusing in their stubbornness, and assumed he was negotiating. She was wrong, and 3 days later, when she learned the truth behind that watch, the most powerful woman in the city sat alone in her office and could not stop the tears she had spent 15 years training herself never to shed. The apartment on Delancey Street smelled like machine oil, coffee grounds, and something faintly sweet, the remnants of a lemon cake Lily had attempted on Saturday morning, mostly successfully, though she had managed to leave batter on the ceiling fan, which Ethan still hadn't figured out how to clean without taking the whole fixture apart. Ethan Carter did not mind. He stood at the kitchen counter at 6:45 in the morning, pouring 2 mugs of coffee, one for himself, one pale and sweet for Lily, who insisted she was old enough for coffee but would reliably drink half and abandon the rest beside her library book. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms with walls thin enough to hear Mrs. Galvin's television through the plaster. A kitchen where the refrigerator door had to be opened at a specific angle or it scraped the linoleum. A window above the sink that looked out onto the alley where, in winter, pigeons clustered on the fire escape as though asking to come in. Ethan was 34 years old. He had broad shoulders that had narrowed slightly from years of working in cramped crawl spaces and ceiling ducts, and a face that would have been described as handsome if anyone had asked him, which no one particularly did. He kept his dark hair short and his chin clean-shaved, not out of vanity, but because both things required less attention. He wore the same style of work shirt in rotating colors, gray, navy, faded green, and steel-toed boots that had been resoled twice. On his left wrist, always, was the watch. It was not impressive to look at. The case was brushed steel gone dull with handling, and the leather strap had been replaced twice by a watchmaker on Orchard Street, who charged $20 and always commented on the condition of the movement inside exceptional, the old man said each time, shaking his head with something between reproach and admiration. The dial was simple. Roman numerals. A small seconds hand. Nothing on it to indicate that anyone with money had ever owned it, let alone that its acquisition was tied to the most important night of Ethan's life. He heard Lily, before he saw her, the particular rhythm of her footsteps, the heavier landing on the left foot that her cardiologist, Dr. Ineolas, Nora Hess, monitored during each quarterly visit but had never categorized as anything more than a gait habit. Lily was 8 years old and had inherited from her mother, Caroline, a quality that Ethan could only describe as the ability to make every room feel more inhabited. She arrived in the kitchen wearing a sweater, 2 sizes too large, her dark hair unbraided from sleep, holding a book against her chest as though she had woken mid-chapter. "There's batter on the ceiling fan," she observed, sitting at the table. "I know. I calculated the trajectory. It was the mixer on speed 4. You shouldn't have had the mixer on speed 4. In retrospect." She accepted her pale coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "You can always ask." She looked at the watch on his wrist with the particular frankness that had characterized her since she could form sentences. "Why don't you sell it? Marcus at school says his dad sold his grandfather's watch, and they went to Florida." Ethan was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he was selecting the right part of the answer to give an 8-year-old before school on a Tuesday. "Some things are worth more than the price someone would pay," he said. Lily considered this with the seriousness she gave to most propositions. "More than Florida?" "More than Florida." She nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced, but willing to file the matter for later. She opened her book. Ethan finished his coffee and gathered his tools. He drove a white service van with Carter HVAC Residential and Commercial stenciled on the side in letters he had applied himself with a template kit, slightly uneven on the final C. His schedule that Tuesday included a compressor replacement in Chelsea, a diagnostic call in the Flatiron, and then, beginning at 3 in the afternoon, a series of pre-event maintenance jobs at the Whitmore Hotel on 57th Street, where a charity gala was being held that evening. He had been hired through the hotel's facilities contractor, Brannigan Services, which had subcontracted to him after their usual HVAC technician broke his wrist playing recreational hockey. Ethan did not know whose gala it was. He did not particularly need to. He stopped at Dr. Hess's office on the way to Chelsea, not for an appointment, just to drop off Lily's latest activity log, a detailed chart he maintained in a green notebook. Lily's sleep hours, her food intake, any complaints of fatigue or chest tightness, her activity level each day. Dr. Hess received it at the front desk without comment, which meant it was what she expected. This was the rhythm of Lily's health management, not crisis, not ignorance, but the sustained, unglamorous work of paying attention. The compressor in Chelsea took 2 hours. The Flatiron diagnostic was a refrigerant leak, which he patched and tagged for a follow-up. He ate a sandwich in his van parked on 22nd Street, listening to a program about deep-sea geology on the radio, and then drove to the Whitmore. The hotel was dressed for the evening, already flowers arriving at the service entrance, a catering crew setting up in the corridor, a woman with a clipboard directing foot traffic with the focused energy of an air traffic controller. No one looked twice at Ethan. He signed in at the facilities desk and was given access to the mechanical room on the 4th floor and the climate control systems for the Whitmore ballroom. He had been working there for 40 minutes, crouched behind an access panel in the corridor outside the ballroom's secondary entrance, when he first noticed her. Victoria Hale was walking the room with 2 people who moved around her, the way small birds move around a larger one present, attentive, slightly cautious. She wore a dark blazer and carried no bag, which gave her an air of absolute self-sufficiency. She was gesturing at the floral arrangements with an expression of technical assessment rather than admiration, as though the peonies were a quarterly report and she was identifying underperforming line items. Ethan returned to his panel. He noticed her glance at him once. The way you notice a piece of furniture briefly, categorically, then not at all. He was tightening the final bracket when she passed close enough that he caught the faint sound of her conversation with the clipboard woman. The ambient temperature in the East Wing dropped 3 degrees between 7 and 8 last year. I want it corrected before guests arrive. Yes, Missin Hale. He made a note in his work log and adjusted the calibration accordingly. It was, he thought, a very specific thing to remember from a charity gala the previous year. He filed it away in the same quiet corner of his mind, where he filed things that were interesting but not relevant, and drove home to make dinner for Lily. Victoria Hale had been running Hale Technologies for 7 years. She had taken the company from a state of managed decline, the kind that follows a founder's sudden death and an interim board's well-meaning incompetence, and built it into the 4th largest data infrastructure firm in North America. She was 36 years old. She had been described in print as ruthless, brilliant, unapproachable, and, in one profile that she had read exactly once and never referenced again, the kind of woman who makes men feel simultaneously inadequate and invisible. She did not particularly care about any of these descriptions. What mattered was the work, and the work was measurable. She had not wanted to host the Whitmore Gala. It had been her father's event, an annual charity auction for children's health initiatives, held each year in the first week of November. When Richard Hale died, the board had expected the event to die with him. Victoria had kept it alive for reasons she had never fully articulated, even to herself. She told people it was good optics for the foundation. She told herself, in unguarded moments, nothing because the unguarded moments were few, and she did not encourage them. Her assistant, a methodical young man named Preston, who had been with her for 3 years and had learned to send communications in bullet-pointed lists rather than paragraphs, had briefed her on the evening's schedule. 130 guests, a seated dinner, an auction of 15 items, ranging from a private wine tasting in Burgundy to a signed manuscript from a reclusive novelist to a collection of 3 vintage watches, one of them, according to the auction catalog, from an anonymous private donor. Victoria had approved the catalog without reading the item descriptions in detail. She did not collect watches. She had approved the inclusion because the auction committee had confirmed the items were of provenance and value, and she trusted the committee because they had never yet embarrassed her. She was reviewing the seating arrangement when Preston entered the suite. The facilities contractor has completed the East Wing calibration. The temperature differential has been addressed. Good. Also the technician. He's still in the corridor. His van is blocking the service entrance. then have someone ask him to move it. Preston hesitated, which was unusual. He's not blocking anything actively. I mentioned it because you asked me to flag any building maintenance personnel who were still on site at 5 o'clock. Security protocol. Victoria glanced up. Name? Ethan Carter. Licensed HVAC contractor. Subcontracted through Brannigan. Clean background. No flags. A pause. He's wearing an unusual watch. She looked at Preston for a moment. He had, in 3 years, never once commented on a person's accessories. Unusual how? Preston placed a photograph on the desk taken, she realized, by the hotel's internal security camera, and then cropped. The watch was clearly visible. Her eyes moved to it and stayed. She knew that watch, not the specific piece, but the model, the Harrington Meridian Caliber, a hand-wound mechanical watch, produced in a limited run of 40 pieces between 1987 and 1989 by a Swiss workshop that had since closed. She knew it because her father had owned one. Because she had sat on his lap as a child and traced the Roman numerals with her finger. Because the watch had not been among his effects when he died, and she had assumed it lost. She was, for perhaps the first time in 15 years, uncertain. Where is he now? She asked. Loading his van. He'll be gone by 5:15. She stood. Tell him to wait. The Whitmore Gala auction was the centerpiece of the evening. Guests in formal wear stood at cocktail tables arranged in arcs before a low stage, and a professional auctioneer, the same man who had run the event for 11 years, moved through the lots with practiced efficiency and occasional humor. Victoria sat in the first row and watched. She had a glass of sparkling water she did not drink. Beside her, her head of corporate communications, a woman named Diane, occasionally leaned in to murmur context about a bidder, which Victoria acknowledged with the faintest movement of her head. She had spoken to Ethan Carter briefly, an hour before guests arrived, in the corridor outside the service entrance. The conversation had been short. She'd asked him where he had acquired the watch. He had looked at her with calm, steady eyes, the look of a man who was not intimidated but was choosing his words carefully, and said it had been given to him. She had asked by whom. He had said he'd rather not discuss it in a hotel corridor before a catering crew. She had found this, against her own expectations, reasonable. She had given him her assistant's card and told him she would like to speak further. He had accepted the card, looked at it briefly, and put it in his shirt pocket without comment. She had spent the first half of the gala thinking about that exchange. The watch she had recognized on the auction catalog, a different piece. A Patek Philippe went for $320,000. A wine-tasting lot went for $60,000. The novelist's manuscript drew a bidding war that ended at $450,000, to general applause. Then the auctioneer mentioned something offhand, a late addition to the program, he said, a story of interest. He had spoken to the facilities manager, who had mentioned the technician on site, who wore a particular watch. The auctioneer, who had a showman's instinct for drama, had taken it upon himself entirely without Victoria's knowledge or authorization to invite Ethan into the room and make a show of it. Ethan appeared at the edge of the stage with the specific expression of a man who had not consented to whatever was currently happening. He was still in his work clothes. The room had gone quiet, in the way that expensive rooms go quiet when something unexpected intrudes. The auctioneer explained that he had heard, from the facilities staff, that the gentleman wore a rather remarkable watch, and that Miss Hale had expressed interest. Was there, he asked with theatrical lightness, a number that might start the conversation? Victoria stood. She did not do it for the audience, or for the spectacle. She did it because the situation required a resolution, and she was the fastest path to one. $1 million, she said. The number moved through the room like a current. Ethan looked at her. She looked at him. There was a moment she would think about it later, trying to categorize it, in which she had the distinct sense that he was not weighing the offer. He had already decided. I appreciate the offer, he said. His voice was unhurried. I'm not able to sell it. A man in the third row laughed, a short, reflexive sound of disbelief. Someone else said something low and unkind. Diane gripped Victoria's elbow, which was the gesture she used when she wanted to signal crisis management. Victoria did not look away from Ethan. You understand what that number means? I do, he said. Then you understand that refusing it is my choice. He said it without aggression, without apology. The plainness of it was almost startling. I'm sorry for the disruption. He nodded to no one in particular and walked back out of the room. Victoria sat back down. The auctioneer, after a 5-second pause that probably felt longer to him than to anyone else, moved on to the next lot. The conversation beside her resumed. The evening continued. She did not hear any of it. Preston had a gift for thoroughness that Victoria had recognized within his first 2 weeks, and then deliberately cultivated through salary and scope of responsibility. By Thursday morning, 36 hours after the gala, he placed a file on her desk with the quiet efficiency of a man delivering something he knew was significant. Ethan Carter, 34. Licensed HVAC contractor. Sole proprietor. Operating for 6 years. Single father to 1 daughter. Lily Ann Carter, age 8. Currently in 3rd grade at P.S. 134 on the Lower East Side. Prior to his contracting business, Ethan had served 8 years with the New York City Fire Department, Engine Company 17, retiring at the rank of lieutenant after an injury sustained during a structure fire, a 2nd-degree burn along his left forearm, documented in medical records as fully healed. No outstanding debts, no foreclosure filings, no civil suits. He had received 2 citations for outstanding service during his FDNY tenure. His tax filings showed a modest and consistent income. His daughter's medical records, obtained through a contact at the insurance verification office Preston had access to, listed a structural cardiac variant minor mitral valve irregularity, monitored quarterly, currently managed without medication. Victoria read the file twice. Then she read it a 3rd time, looking for the thing Preston might have missed. The footnote that explained why a man in this situation would refuse $1 million for a watch he clearly could not afford to own. She found nothing. She called Preston in. Former firefighter. Engine 17. What building fires did they respond to, in what would be the range? 15 years ago, give or take. I can pull the incident logs. FDNY records are public past a certain date. Do it. She sat at her window while he worked. The city moved below her with its usual indifferent velocity. She thought about the file. She thought about the way Ethan Carter had said my choice, not defensively, not defiantly, just as a statement of fact, like naming the weather. She had been refused before. Negotiations stalled. Acquisitions blocked. Bids declined. She was accustomed to refusal as a tactical move, a position to be countered or understood in terms of leverage. This did not feel like leverage. It felt like something else entirely, something she didn't have clean language for. Preston returned in 40 minutes with a printed incident log and a second, smaller document. Engine 17 responded to 43 major structure fires in the relevant 5-year window, he said. One of them, November 14th, 11 years ago, was a warehouse fire on West 20th Street. The building housed a gallery space on the upper 2 floors. One civilian was rescued from the 3rd floor by a Lieutenant Ethan Carter before the staircase collapsed. He paused. The civilian's name was Richard Hale. The room was very quiet. Victoria looked at the document, then at Preston, then back at the document. My father, she said. Yes. She stood up slowly, as though her body needed a moment to realign itself around this new center of gravity. She walked to the window. The city was still moving. This was not adequate, she thought distantly. The city should not simply be moving. He never told me, she said. Not to Preston. To no one. The fire report lists Lieutenant Carter as the responding officer who performed the extraction. There's a supplemental note, I found it in the FDNY Commendation Archive, indicating that Mr. Hale had been given a personal gift by the rescued civilian as a private gesture of thanks, outside any official channel. The note is vague on specifics, but the timeline matches. 11 years ago. Her father had died 10 years ago, 8 months after the fire, from a cardiac event unrelated to the building blaze. In the months between the fire and his death, he had not, as far as she had known, as far as anyone had told her, mentioned being rescued by anyone. She thought about this. She thought about her father's particular brand of privacy, the way he held significant things close, not from secrecy, but from a kind of personal reverence. As though naming something too loudly might diminish it. He had been that way with love, too. She had understood it only after he was gone. She found, to her considerable alarm, that her eyes were burning. "Find me an address for Carter," she said, keeping her voice level. "I want to speak with him in person." She went alone. She did not take a car service. She took the subway to Delancey Street and walked 2 blocks in weather that had turned cold and damp, and she stood outside a 6-story walk-up and pressed the buzzer for apartment 4C, with the feeling unfamiliar and specific of a person approaching a reckoning. Ethan answered the intercom after a moment. "Who is it?" "Victoria Hale." A pause. Then the door buzzed open. He met her in the hallway outside his apartment rather than inviting her in, which she recognized as intentional, a man establishing the boundary of what this was. He had changed from his work clothes and was wearing a plain navy shirt and dark jeans. The watch was on his wrist. He looked at her with that same quality of focused calm, as though nothing about this situation was surprising him, which somehow made her feel that she was at a disadvantage. "I found the incident report," she said. "He was quiet. 11 years ago. West 20th Street. You pulled my father out of a burning building. I did my job. He gave you the watch." Ethan's eyes moved briefly to the watch and then back to her. "Yes. And you never contacted us. You never said anything." She heard the edge in her voice and was not entirely sure what it was the edge of. Gratitude. Grief. Something adjacent to both. "It wasn't my place to. He never told me," she said. "He never told anyone." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, looking at a middle point between the floor and her face. When he spoke, his voice was measured, but there was something underneath it that required effort to contain. "He came to find me," Ethan said. "About 6 weeks after the fire. Showed up at the station. He gave me the watch in person. We talked for maybe an hour." He paused. He knew how to listen. I don't know how else to say it. He just knew. "What were you talking about?" "My wife had died 8 months earlier." He said it simply, without dramatic inflection. The way people say things they have said enough times that the saying of it has become separate from the feeling. "Car accident. Lily was 4 months old. I wasn't doing very well. Your father didn't know any of that when he came. He was just there to say thank you. But we ended up talking for an hour." Victoria felt the cold of the hallway more acutely. "He told me something I needed to hear," Ethan continued. "I don't remember the exact words, but the meaning was that grief doesn't end, but it changes. That you can carry something heavy for a long time and it doesn't get lighter, but you get stronger." That was what he said. He looked at the watch. "He gave me this before he left, said it was important to him and he wanted me to have it. I told him it was too much. He said it wasn't." Victoria pressed her palm flat against the hallway wall and focused on the texture of the paint. "I didn't find out he died until I read it in the paper," Ethan said. "I thought about reaching out to the family, but I didn't know what I'd say. He'd given me something I couldn't give back. I thought maybe the best thing I could do was just..." He paused, searching for the word, "keep it." "He was dying when he came to you," Victoria said. Her voice was smaller than she intended. "He had been diagnosed 3 weeks before the fire. He didn't tell anyone for months." She swallowed. "I didn't know until after." Ethan looked at her. "He knew," she said. "When he came to see you, he already knew." The hallway was silent, except for the muffled sound of a television somewhere below them. The space between them had taken on a new quality. Not uncomfortable, but weighted, like standing in a room after the electricity has gone out. Ethan said, quietly, "I'm sorry." She believed him, completely, without analysis. She believed him in the way she hadn't believed a spontaneous expression of sympathy since she was 17 years old. "I don't want to buy the watch," she said. "I want you to know I understand why you kept it. I understand completely. I know. I acted badly. At the gala. I came in without context. And it was a strange situation," he said. Not dismissing it, but not requiring the apology to be any larger than it already was. "You didn't know." She looked at him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Your daughter, Lily. Her cardiac condition. How is she doing?" His expression shifted, something careful and private moving across it. "She's monitored. Her cardiologist is good. If you ever need resources, referrals, the foundation has a pediatric cardiology program. I'll keep it in mind." Firm. Not unkind, but clear. He was not a man who accepted charity wrapped in genuine feeling and saw it as something different from charity. She nodded. She turned to go. "Miss Halle." She turned back. "The watch my daughter asked me why I wouldn't sell it." He glanced down at his wrist, then back at her. "I never told her the whole story. But I think one day I will, because it's not just about your father or what he did for me. It's about what it means to have a stranger take the time to see you." He paused. "Your father took the time to see me. That's the thing you can't buy." Victoria Hale, who had not cried in public since her father's funeral, and who had privately not cried at all since a hotel room in Singapore 4 years ago, walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood looking at the closed doors for a long moment. Then she got on the elevator and wept. The Hale Technologies board met every other Monday in the 38th floor conference room. And what Victoria had found over 7 years was that the energy of those meetings told her more than their minutes. She had learned to read the room the way she had learned to read earnings reports, looking for what wasn't said as much as what was. The Monday after the gala, the room was wrong. Nothing overt. Daniel Reardon, Chief Operating Officer, was professional and thorough as always, walking through the Q3 infrastructure deployment with the practiced smoothness of someone who had rehearsed. He was 51, silver-haired, impeccably groomed, with the kind of lateral ambition that had never quite been confirmed, but was regularly implied in whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. She had kept him because his operational acuity was genuine, and because close enemies, she had learned from her father, were more manageable than distant ones. What she noticed was a particular quality of stillness around him when she entered. Not guilt, Daniel was too controlled for guilt, but containment. The specific stillness of a man managing the gap between what he knows and what he's prepared to reveal. It took Preston 48 hours to confirm what she had begun to suspect. A story had begun circulating in the financial press, small mentions, nothing prominent, that the Hale Technologies CEO had become personally entangled with a maintenance contractor who had provoked an embarrassing public scene at the company's flagship charity event. The framing was careful and deniable. Questions about Victoria's judgment. About whether recent behavior suggested distraction from the company's strategic priorities. The sourcing was anonymous. The timing was precise. Preston laid the printouts on her desk with his usual measured care. 3 outlets. The original appears to have originated from a communications firm that has worked with Reardon on 2 previous engagements. Victoria looked at the printouts, then set them aside. And the technician himself? There's a secondary thread being developed. The suggestion is that Mr. Carter sought the connection deliberately, that the refusal at the auction was staged for attention. She was quiet for a moment. "This will reach the trade press by end of week." "Likely. And Lily? The daughter?" Preston's voice was the same, but his expression was not. "Her school has received 2 anonymous contacts in the last 24 hours. The nature of the contacts isn't confirmed yet. But children talk." Victoria stood up. She went to the window. Outside, the city was its usual impossible self. Simultaneous and indifferent. She had built this company on the understanding that power required maintenance, not just the accumulation of it, but the constant, vigilant work of knowing where the pressure was being applied. She had spent 7 years being careful. She had spent 36 hours thinking about a man in a hallway on Delancey Street. And in that time, the floor had shifted slightly under her feet. She was not afraid of Daniel Reardon. She was not afraid of the trade press, or the anonymous sources, or the implication that her judgment had been compromised by sentiment. But Lily Carter was 8 years old, with a heart condition, and a father who had spent 11 years carrying a secret act of grace without asking for anything in return, and the idea that this man's daughter was now a target in a corporate game was something Victoria Hale found for the first time in a very long time. Intolerable in a way that was not strategic, not calculated, just wrong. She turned from the window. "Schedule the shareholders' meeting," she said. "Not the regular calendar. A special session." Friday. Preston looked at her. "That's 4 days." "I know. The notice requirements." "I know." She picked up her phone. "I'm going to need the Foundation's legal team, the communications director, and I want the incident report from Engine 17 digitized and verified by a forensic document service by Thursday noon." She paused. "And Preston, find out if Lily Carter is all right." On Wednesday evening, Ethan received a call from PS 134. Not from a teacher, but from the principal, Dr. Allison Webb, a woman Ethan had spoken to twice before, once about Lily's reading advancement program, and once about an incident in which Lily had corrected her science teacher on the properties of igneous rock with such comprehensive thoroughness that the teacher had filed a formal note about classroom dynamics. Dr. Webb had, on that occasion, been barely suppressing a smile. She was not suppressing anything now. "Mr. Carter, I want to call you directly because I believe in transparency. There have been some comments circulating among older students, things they've heard from parents. I think about media coverage of your family. Lily hasn't been targeted directly, but she's a perceptive child, and she knows something is being said." Ethan drove home from a service call in Midtown and sat in his van outside his building for 3 minutes without getting out. Lily was at the kitchen table when he came in, working on a school project about geological formations, with 3 library books open and a notebook in which she had drawn diagrams of fault lines with color-coded layers. She looked up when he entered. "Mrs. Peterson said, I should consider other perspectives on my sedimentary analysis," she said. "But the data doesn't really support alternative perspectives. You can acknowledge a perspective and then explain why the data points elsewhere," Ethan said. She considered this. "That's diplomatic. That's science." She looked at him for a long moment, with the particular quality of attention she used when she knew something was being withheld. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. People are saying things about you." He sat down across from her. The library books were open to a cross-section of a mountain range. He looked at the fault lines. "Some people are saying something happened at a party that made me look foolish," he said. "And some other people are trying to make it worse because it benefits them. Why? Because when you have a lot to lose, you sometimes try to make other people lose things too. It makes you feel safer." Lily absorbed this. "That's a pretty sad way to live." "It is. Are you scared?" He looked at his daughter, at the fault lines in the notebook, the library books about things that moved slowly and changed everything, the mug of cold pale coffee she hadn't finished. He thought about a hospital room 3 years ago, when her valve irregularity had caused a brief arrhythmia during a flu, and the particular quality of fear that had no bottom to it, that was nothing like any ordinary fear he had ever felt. This, by comparison, was manageable. "No," he said. "Not really." She nodded, reassured, and turned back to her diagrams. He was at the sink washing dishes at 9 o'clock, when his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. It said, "Lily is all right. I made sure. I'm sorry this reached her. V. Hess." He stood at the sink for a moment. Then he dried his hands and put the phone face down on the counter and went to check that Lily was asleep. Lily was admitted to St. Luke's on Thursday morning. It was not a crisis, not in the way crises are in films, with running and code bells and a gurney in a hallway. It was a quiet escalation of something that had been monitored for months. Dr. Hess had detected during the Wednesday check-in a rhythm pattern she didn't like, and had recommended inpatient observation with a consult from the pediatric cardiology team. Lily was calm about it, which was somehow harder to bear than if she had been frightened. She brought 2 books and asked whether the hospital had any good puzzles. Ethan filled out the admittance forms, spoke to Dr. Hess for 23 minutes, confirmed the procedure schedule, arranged for Mrs. Galvan to bring Lily's 3rd set of library books, and then sat in a chair outside the procedure room and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific weight of being alone with something too large for the size of himself. He was not a man who called people. He had, in the years since Caroline died, learned to manage the architecture of his own life with a kind of careful self-sufficiency that was not, he knew, entirely healthy. But that had become structural, the way old buildings adapt to the weight they carry, rather than replacing the beams. He sat in the chair. He held the watch in his palm, which he did sometimes without thinking about it, the weight and temperature of it. The small specific tick of the movement, which he could feel but not hear. He had not done this since the night of the gala. Richard Hale had sat in a chair something like this, he thought. Not here, not this hospital, but somewhere. With a diagnosis that he had absorbed alone, that he had carried for weeks before telling his family, that had made him want to visit a lieutenant at Engine 17 and take an hour to have a real conversation. Ethan had wondered, sometimes, whether what Richard had given him that day, the listening, the watch, the words about grief changing, had been partly for himself, a way of ensuring that the hour was real, that it mattered, that something of substance had been done with the time still remaining. He closed his hand around the watch. He did not hear anyone approach until Victoria Hale sat down in the chair beside him. He turned to look at her. She was in a dark coat, no briefcase, no Preston, no armor of professional context. She looked like a person, which was different from how she had looked at the hotel. "How did you know she was here?" he asked. "I asked Dr. Hess's office to notify me if there was a change in Lily's condition. I should have told you I was doing that. I'm telling you now." He looked at her for a moment. "That's a significant thing to do, without asking." "Yes," she said. "I overstepped." He held her gaze. "I'm not trying to insert myself," she said carefully. "I'm aware that my last name means something complicated in your life, and I'm not trying to make it more complicated." She looked at the corridor, at the closed door. "I just didn't want you to be sitting here alone." He was quiet for a long time. The hospital had its own rhythm, footsteps, the soft announce of the intercom. A cart being wheeled at the far end of the corridor. Ordinary sounds beneath extraordinary circumstances. "She asked me once why I never talk about her mother," Ethan said. "She was 6. I didn't have a good answer. I said that some things are too important to talk about all the time, and she said," he almost smiled. "She said that didn't make logical sense. She sounds like a remarkable person. She is." A pause. "Caroline was too. That's the hardest part. Not the absence. It's that Lily is so much like her, and she'll never get to know that about herself." Victoria said nothing. She was not trying to fix it. She was just sitting there in the chair, present, which was, he thought, the exact right thing. He reached into his shirt pocket and turned his phone over. He showed her the message she had sent. "Thank you," he said, "for protecting her. I should have anticipated the exposure. I didn't. That's on me. You couldn't have known Reardon would go that direction. I should have known he'd go a direction." She looked at her hands. "I've been running this company for 7 years, and I've kept Daniel Reardon close because I understood exactly how he thought. The problem is that I forgot that understanding someone's tactics doesn't make you immune to them when you're distracted." He looked at her sidelong. "You don't seem like someone who gets distracted." "I'm not, generally." A pause. "Your father changed something," she said quietly, carefully, as though testing the weight of the words before fully committing to them. "Not you, the story of what he did. What it meant." She looked at the closed door of the procedure room. "I've been running on a specific kind of emptiness for 10 years, and I didn't realize it had a shape until you named it." Ethan turned the watch over in his hand. "He was a good man," he said. "He was," she said. "I miss him differently now than I did last week." They sat in the corridor in the ordinary light of a Thursday afternoon, and the tick of the watch moved steadily between them. The Hale Technologies special shareholders meeting convened at 9 o'clock on Friday in the 38th floor conference room. Victoria had spent Thursday evening preparing. Not the materials. Preston had assembled those with his usual thoroughness, but herself. She had sat in her apartment for an hour with a glass of water and the image of Ethan Carter sitting outside a hospital room, holding a watch that had belonged to her father, and she had thought about what it meant to move through the world carrying things that cost you something. She arrived at 9 sharp. The board was already seated. Daniel Reardon was in his usual position, third chair on the left, with the specific quality of alertness that she recognized as readiness. She stood at the head of the table and did not open with the agenda. 11 years ago, she said, there was a fire on West 20th Street. A man named Richard Hale, my father, your former chairman, was pulled from the third floor of a burning building by a firefighter named Ethan Carter. My father never told anyone. The firefighter never told anyone. And for 11 years, an act that likely saved this company's future because my father was still alive for 8 months after that fire, during which time he finalized the succession plan that put this board in place. That act has been entirely invisible. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when they understand that the next words will be important. Last week, she continued, Mr. Carter attended this company's charity event as a contracted maintenance technician. I made an uninformed and public offer to buy the watch my father gave him as a private gesture of gratitude. Mr. Carter declined. Several members of this company's senior leadership subsequently decided that Mr. Carter's story and the implied personal connection represented a vulnerability to be exploited. She looked at Daniel Reardon. He met her gaze with the steadiness of someone who has prepared a countermove. I want to be specific, she said. The media contacts, the anonymous sourcing to the trade press, and most significantly, the contacts made to an 8-year-old child's school. Those did not come from a competitor. They came from inside this building. Preston, standing near the door, produced a folder and placed it in front of each board member with quiet efficiency. This folder contains the communications records, the firm connections, and the documentation. I'll give you 30 seconds to review the top sheet. She waited. Watched Reardon's face. The stillness in him had changed quality, from containment to calculation. What I want the board to understand, Victoria said, is not primarily about Daniel Reardon's ambitions, which are not surprising, or about his methods, which are not original. What I want you to understand is this. The man this company tried to harm spent 11 years carrying a secret kindness with no expectation of return. He raised a daughter alone while working a skilled trade and managing her medical care with exhaustive care. He refused $1 million for a watch because the watch represented something that cannot be valued in money. And when his daughter came under pressure because of a story this company helped to manufacture, he sat in a hospital corridor and did not ask a single person for help. She paused. That is what integrity looks like. I want this company to look like that. She let it sit for a moment. Daniel, I'd like your resignation before end of day. The documentation in front of you makes the alternative a full governance review, external audit, and board vote considerably more time-consuming and public. I'd recommend the efficient path. She looked at the rest of the table. I'd also recommend that the rest of you reflect on what you knew and when, and whether the efficient path is also in your interest. She sat down. 3 hours later, Daniel Reardon's resignation was processed. 2 other board members requested brief conversations. Preston handled both. Lily Carter came home on Sunday. She had, during her 4-day hospital stay, completed 2 puzzles, one of which was, she noted with some contempt, clearly mislabeled as 1,000 pieces when it was more accurately 950, started a new book about glacial geology, and developed an informed opinion about the relative quality of different hospital Jell-O flavors. Lime ranked last, strawberry ranked second, orange ranked first, based on consistent performance. She had asked Dr. Hess 2 technical questions about her cardiac anatomy that Dr. Hess had answered with full seriousness, and then mentioned to Ethan in the hallway as genuinely impressive anatomical curiosity for someone who hasn't started middle school. Ethan carried her bag up the stairs, while Lily walked beside him with the specific dignity of a person who has been hospitalized and is not prepared to be treated as fragile. On the kitchen table, there was a package that Mrs. Galvin had signed for. Lily inspected it with interest. It's addressed to both of us, she said. He opened it. Inside was a formal letter on Hale Technologies Foundation stationery, and beneath the letter, a smaller sealed envelope addressed to Lily personally. The formal letter described the establishment of a new fund, the Richard Hale Memorial Fund for Pediatric Cardiology, in partnership with St. Luke's Medical Center, which would provide full coverage for ongoing cardiac monitoring and treatment for children of first responders, current and retired. The first named beneficiary was Lily Ann Carter. There was no flourish, no public announcement, no press release, just the letter and the small sealed envelope for Lily, which she opened herself. It said, in handwriting rather than print, Dear Lily, Your father is the best person I have encountered in a long time. I wanted you to know that someone besides you can see it. The world needs more people who keep the important things. I think you already know how to do that. V.H. Lily read it twice. Then she put it on the table with great care and looked at her father. She's the billionaire from the party, Lily said. Yes. She cried in the elevator, didn't she? He looked at his daughter. I have no idea what you mean. Dad. It's obvious. She picked up the letter again and read it a third time. She's right, you know. About keeping the important things. He sat down. I know. The watch. Yeah. She nodded. Then she opened one of the library books Mrs. Galvin had brought, something about tectonic plates, and began to read, folding the letter carefully and sliding it inside the cover as a bookmark. Ethan sat across from her in the small kitchen with the window above the sink and the refrigerator door that scraped the linoleum and the faint residue of lemon batter on the ceiling fan. The afternoon light came in flat and pale through the alley window. The city moved beyond it with its usual indifferent velocity. He looked at the watch on his wrist. The Harrington Meridian caliber, 40 pieces made. One given in a hospital visit by a dying man who had wanted an hour of real conversation with someone who had saved his life, or had saved him something. He thought about Richard Hale, who had known how to listen. He thought about Lily, who had asked once whether people who kept the important things always got hurt for it, and to whom he had said he hoped correctly that sometimes the keeping was the point, regardless of the cost. He thought about Victoria, sitting in a hallway chair in a dark coat with no briefcase, just present, which had been the right thing in the same simple and inarguable way that the math is right. He did not have a clean summary for what the past 2 weeks had been. He was not a man who needed clean summaries. He was a man who kept records in green notebooks and serviced equipment quietly, and drove home through the city after long days to make dinner for his daughter. And who had, on his wrist, the weight of something a good man had trusted him with. He heard Lily turn a page. Outside, a pigeon landed on the fire escape, with its usual air of mild expectation. Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one pale and sweet, and destined to be abandoned beside a geology book, and sat across from his daughter in the imperfect, sufficient light of a Sunday afternoon. Some things are worth more than the price someone would pay. He had always known this. But it was good, sometimes, to be reminded of the shape of what you knew.